She built the hotel, signed every check, designed every inch. But when she walked through the front door, they told her to leave. 15 minutes later, she fired the entire staff. This isn't just about power, it's about respect. And what happened next shook an entire industry. "You can't be here." That's what the front desk manager told her. Standing in the sleek marble lobby of the luxury hotel she had built from the ground up, CEO Danielle Thomas narrowed her eyes slightly. Not in anger, but in curiosity. She didn't respond immediately. She just let the silence settle like fog. Her jet-black heels, still echoing from the sidewalk, came to a stop on the signature navy and gold welcome rug, one she personally approved during the design phase 3 years ago. Dressed in a tailored navy suit with a silk scarf tucked perfectly into the collar, Danielle looked every bit the global powerhouse she had become. She had just flown 14 hours from Dubai, where she delivered a keynote on inclusive leadership to a sold-out crowd of international business leaders. Her luggage had already arrived and was en route to the penthouse suite, the one named after her late grandmother, Evelyn. And yet here she was, being told by a man half her age, with barely 6 years of hospitality experience, that she was in the wrong place. "This area is reserved for VIP guests only," the manager, Greg, added smugly, not even looking up from his monitor as he tapped away. "You'll need to wait outside or use the side entrance near the parking structure." Danielle tilted her head, slightly amused. Her assistant, Maya, who had been just a few steps behind her, immediately stepped forward to intervene. But Danielle, without taking her eyes off Greg, gently raised her hand to stop her. She wanted to see how far this would go, how far ignorance, assumption, and unchecked ego could stretch in a place designed to eliminate all of the above. Behind her, 2 bellhops stood awkwardly, unsure whether to take her bags up or back. The concierge quietly turned his head. No one, not one person, intervened or asked for confirmation. They simply watched. Danielle inhaled slowly, as if absorbing every detail. She said nothing, and what happened next would shake the entire company. Danielle turned on her heel and walked out of the lobby, not out of defeat, but out of strategy. 15 minutes later, 3 black SUVs pulled up outside the hotel's entrance. The hotel doorman, who had earlier pretended not to notice the exchange, now stood rigid as the door swung open. Out stepped Danielle, this time flanked by 2 attorneys, her head of HR, and a private security team. She no longer wore the calm curiosity of a traveler. She wore the authority of a woman who owned everything within those walls. Her stride was steady, her eyes focused. She walked straight to the front desk, where Greg, still comfortably behind the counter, froze mid-sentence with a guest. "Ms. Thomas, I didn't realize," he began to stammer, suddenly remembering the corporate training materials where her face had appeared countless times. But it was too late. Danielle nodded once toward HR, who stepped forward with a briefcase and began pulling out documents. "Greg," Danielle said, her voice cool but unmistakably final. "You're done." "Wait, what?" He blinked, his voice raising. "You can't just—" "I can," she interrupted, turning to the rest of the lobby staff. "And I am. Every single employee working this shift is terminated, effective immediately." Gasps echoed across the room. One staff member dropped the clipboard she was holding. Another began whispering urgently into her headset. The HR director began distributing envelopes, termination notices, final paycheck breakdowns, severance agreements, and a brief explanation of Danielle's decision. "This isn't about me being angry," Danielle said, addressing the stunned employees directly. "This is about culture, the one I built, the one this hotel was supposed to represent. You judged a woman who walked in alone, dressed professionally with no cause or conflict. You made assumptions. You didn't check the system. You didn't ask questions. You didn't uphold our standards. You disrespected a guest who, by your own definition, was a VIP. And that guest just happened to be your CEO." She looked at Greg one final time. "This isn't personal, it's professional, and your conduct failed both." As her private security escorted the dismissed staff off the premises, a hush fell over the building. In 15 minutes, everything had changed. By the next morning, news of the incident spread like wildfire across social media. Headlines blared, Black CEO kicked out of her own hotel, fires entire staff within the hour. Some critics questioned if the move was too extreme. Others called it a masterclass in accountability. But Danielle didn't jump into interviews. She didn't tweet. She waited. 48 hours later, she posted a calm, 90-second video from the penthouse suite, the same one she had been denied access to. This wasn't about revenge, she said into the camera. It was about values. It was about reminding people that leadership isn't just about power. It's about presence. When your team forgets what excellence looks like, you don't send an email. You show up and you fix it. The video went viral. CEOs, DEI advocates, and corporate trainers around the world reshared her words. Danielle quietly initiated a full internal audit across all her hotel properties. She rolled out a new global training initiative on unconscious bias and service excellence. But perhaps most powerfully, she rehired for that hotel herself. This time, she promoted from within. The new general manager, a former front desk associate who had once been overlooked for a leadership role because she didn't fit the image. Under the new team, the hotel's ratings climbed, guest reviews soared, and employee morale was at an all-time high. Danielle didn't just fire the old team, she raised the bar and reminded the world that true leadership walks in, gets disrespected, and still walks out in control. Greg didn't just stop there. When Danielle, maintaining her calm composure, politely asked to speak with the hotel director, Greg gave a condescending laugh and waved his hand as if swatting away a fly. "Ma'am," he said with smug assurance, "I've worked here for 6 years. I am the director tonight." His tone dripped with superiority, the kind born not from real authority, but from a bloated sense of control. Danielle didn't flinch. She didn't correct him. She didn't need to. Her eyes moved slowly across the room. To her right, the concierge caught her gaze for half a second before quickly pretending to organize brochures. To her left, the doorman who had seen the entire exchange unfolded his arms and glanced away, tapping aimlessly on his phone like this moment wasn't happening. Behind the counter, another staff member leaned toward a colleague and whispered something under her breath, followed by a stifled laugh. Danielle caught it all. Every gesture, every subtle expression, every signal of silent complicity. She wasn't surprised. She'd encountered this brand of arrogance before, dressed up in policy, wrapped in uniforms, disguised as protocol. And yet what struck her most wasn't just Greg's refusal to acknowledge her. It was the collective failure of everyone around him to question it. Danielle stood in her own hotel, surrounded by her own staff, wearing the power and grace that had built the very brand they worked for, and not one person bothered to verify her identity or simply offer help. But Danielle didn't shout. She didn't demand to be recognized. She didn't make a scene. Instead, she calmly reached into her designer tote, pulled out her phone, and typed a message with deliberate precision. No anger, no rush, just focus. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out the same door she had entered. Not because she was defeated, but because she had just set something far bigger in motion. 15 minutes later, the hotel's valet looked up and nearly dropped his clipboard as 3 sleek black SUVs rolled to a stop in front of the main entrance. The air around them shifted. Tinted windows reflected the golden glow of the hotel's front lights, and as the engines turned off, the tension in the air turned electric. Out stepped 2 attorneys in tailored suits, Danielle's head of HR clutching a leather-bound folder, and 2 members of her private security detail dressed in black. The staff inside had no warning, no heads up, no idea what was coming. And then came Danielle. This time, she didn't walk. She stormed. Her steps were firm, her back straight, her expression unshakable. The doorman jumped to attention and opened the door with a stammered apology, which she ignored completely. The once dismissive concierge now stood frozen behind his desk, trying to make sense of the sudden change in atmosphere. Greg, still at the front desk and deeply confused by the VIP-level presence flooding the lobby, looked up, and his face drained of all color the moment he saw her walk back in, flanked by power. "Ms. Thomas, I didn't know. I had no idea," he sputtered, eyes darting between her and the attorneys. Danielle didn't even slow her pace. She stopped directly in front of the front desk, turned to her HR director, and said clearly, Start with him. The HR director opened her folder and pulled out a termination letter with Greg's name on it. Greg took a step back. Wait, you're firing me? Just like that? Danielle turned to him, her voice like stone wrapped in velvet. You refused service to your CEO. You lied about your role. You embarrassed this brand in front of guests in your own team. And worst of all, you acted on bias and ignorance while standing on a foundation I built. Yes, Greg, you're done. The HR director began distributing envelopes one by one to every staff member who had been present during the incident, every witness who stood by in silence, every employee who watched and said nothing. The hallway fell silent, interrupted only by the sound of envelopes being torn open and the click of security radios. As the terminated staff gathered their things under the watchful eye of security, Danielle turned to the remaining staff, the night shift crew who had just arrived and were quietly watching from the corridor. This isn't revenge, she said, addressing them all. This is accountability. Her voice was steady, her tone decisive. This hotel is not just marble and chandeliers. It's a statement. It's a commitment to excellence, dignity, and respect for every guest, every employee, and every partner. If you think titles protect you from basic decency, you don't belong here. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Leadership is not loud. It doesn't need to scream, but it does need to show up. And tonight I showed up, not as a guest, not even as your CEO, but as the standard this company was built on. The staff nodded, silently absorbing what just happened. Some looked inspired, others looked nervous, but all of them understood one thing clearly. The culture was about to change. Danielle turned and headed toward the elevator, flanked by her team. As the doors opened, she looked back only once, not in anger, but in resolution. The lobby, moments ago so full of smug indifference, now stood quiet in the presence of real authority. She didn't have to raise her voice. She didn't need to prove who she was, because sometimes power doesn't knock. It enters, corrects the course, and rebuilds everything from the ground up. Danielle walked straight to the front desk without a single word wasted. Her heels struck the polished floor with rhythmic certainty, echoing like a countdown. Greg, who had spent the last few minutes pacing nervously and whispering with another employee, tried to muster some charm as she approached. But charm wasn't going to save him now. Ms. Thomas, look, I think there's been a misunderstanding, he began, holding his hands up like he was stopping traffic. I didn't realize who you were. If someone had told me... Danielle cut him off with a simple gesture. One hand up, palm out. Final. She wasn't here to debate. She turned slightly toward the HR director and said in a clear, professional tone, effective immediately, every employee working this shift is to be relieved of duty. The sentence landed like a thunderclap. The lobby froze. Phones paused mid-scroll. Mouths hung open. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, in a soft and controlled voice, Danielle continued, this team failed at the most basic level of hospitality, human decency. There was no verification, no discretion, no professionalism, only assumption, arrogance, and silence. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her tone did the cutting. Her presence did the damage. Greg looked like he wanted to say something, but instead, his shoulders dropped under the weight of reality. His time was up. The HR director began handing out formal termination packets, thick envelopes labeled with employee names, company logos, and legal signatures. Each one contained a personalized termination letter, severance details, a breakdown of accrued benefits, and instructions for final pay. As each employee received theirs, they were escorted by private security toward a side exit to gather their belongings. No time was wasted. No words were exchanged beyond what was necessary. One woman started to cry. Another man whispered, I didn't even say anything. But that was the point. Danielle hadn't just fired Greg. She had removed an entire culture, one built on complacency and silent consent. She wasn't punishing just bad behavior. She was holding people accountable for inaction. And she was making sure every decision she made sent a clear signal. Your silence in the face of disrespect makes you part of the problem. As employees left one by one, guests in the lobby looked on in stunned silence. A few even applauded quietly. Danielle caught the eyes of a young couple near the fireplace who gave her a subtle nod of support. She returned it. She didn't need applause, but she welcomed understanding. With the last employee from that shift now gone, Danielle stood once more in the center of her lobby, not just as a CEO, but as a woman who had turned personal insult into corporate transformation. She turned to the remaining overnight staff who had just clocked in and said, "If you're here now, it's because your shift hadn't started yet. You haven't failed, but that doesn't mean you're exempt from the standard." She pointed toward the signature wall, where quotes from her original launch speech were engraved into glass. One of them read, "Luxury isn't about price. It's about how people feel the moment they walk through the door." She looked around and added, "You've all read that. You've quoted it in orientation, but tonight proved how easy it is to forget. Moving forward, forgetting isn't an option." Then she gave a rare smile, not one of victory, but one of purpose. "We will rebuild, not with policies alone, but with people who understand that respect is not conditional. It is the floor, not the ceiling." And with that, she turned and walked toward the elevator, the same one Greg had blocked her from just an hour earlier. This time no one stopped her. The concierge held the elevator door. The doorman stood at full attention. And as the elevator closed behind her, Danielle didn't look back. She didn't have to. Her message had been delivered, loud and clear, not with raised voices, but with irreversible action. By sunrise, the story had already escaped the walls of the hotel and exploded onto the internet. A guest who had witnessed the entire confrontation uploaded a short video to social media. Danielle walking out, the SUVs arriving, staff being escorted out, and her final words echoing in the lobby. The caption read, "CEO gets kicked out of her own hotel, comes back with fire." Within hours, it had over 1 million views. Hashtags like one's Danielle Thomas, just CEO Justice, and Check Your Bias started trending. Major news outlets picked it up by noon. One blog headline read, "Black CEO fired entire staff after being mistaken for a guest," and people are cheering. The public reaction was electric. Comments poured in from around the world. Some called her move legendary. Others called it overdue. Even celebrities weighed in. An actor tweeted, "That's how you clean house and raise standards. Take notes, corporate America." But Danielle, she stayed silent. No press interviews, no tweets, no TV appearances. She didn't ride the wave of internet fame. She let the moment speak for itself, because for her, it was never about going viral. It was about doing what was right. 48 hours later, she released a short video from the penthouse suite. No flashy production, just a simple camera setup, the city skyline behind her, and her presence. Calm, direct, and unapologetic. She wore a charcoal blazer, no makeup glam, just clarity in her eyes. "This wasn't about revenge," she began. "It was about values." She paused, letting the words land before continuing. "I didn't walk into that hotel as a boss looking for special treatment. I walked in as a human being expecting basic respect. The problem wasn't just what was said, it was what wasn't done. No one asked my name. No one checked the system. They decided who I was before I said a word." Her voice was steady, controlled. "This happens to people every day. People get misjudged because of how they look, where they're from, or what someone assumes they can afford. I didn't fire those employees because I was angry. I fired them because they didn't represent what this company stands for." Within minutes, the clip was shared by Fortune 500 leaders, DEI consultants, and social justice advocates. She wasn't trending anymore. She was leading. Her quiet discipline and bold action became a case study in how to enforce standards without theatrics. She didn't cancel anyone. She corrected the culture. Behind the scenes, Danielle launched a sweeping audit across all 12 hotels under her brand's umbrella. She brought in external equity consultants, restructured her executive training programs, and implemented a zero-tolerance bias response policy across every property. But it didn't stop there. Danielle made sure that hiring, especially at frontline customer-facing roles, included rigorous situational interviews, real scenarios designed to test character, not just credentials. At the same time, she personally reached out to past employees with a reputation for excellence who had once been overlooked or undervalued. We don't just need new faces, she told her team. We need better mindsets. The most symbolic decision she made was at the very hotel where the incident took place. She named a new general manager, Jasmine Hill, a woman who had worked front desk night shifts for years, quietly outperforming everyone but never promoted due to lack of leadership polish. Danielle knew better. She saw Jasmine's strength and grace, her ability to connect, and her deep understanding of the brand's heartbeat. Under Jasmine's leadership, the hotel experienced its highest guest satisfaction ratings in company history. Danielle hadn't just cleaned house. She built a new foundation, stronger, smarter, and more aligned with her vision. And in doing so, she proved one powerful truth. Real change doesn't happen when you go viral. It happens when you follow through. Quiet justice, loud results. Danielle didn't just rebuild the hotel, she transformed it. The space that once echoed with quiet prejudice and surface-level professionalism now radiated a new kind of energy. It wasn't just about fancy light fixtures or imported marble anymore. It was about people, real people. People who understood the responsibility of creating an experience that made every guest feel like they belonged. She walked through the lobby 2 weeks later, this time without security, without cameras, and without fanfare. The new team didn't hesitate. They greeted her with warmth, offered assistance without judgment, and treated her not like a stranger or a celebrity, but like a respected member of their community. Jasmine, the new general manager, stood by the check-in desk not as a figurehead, but as a present, engaged leader. Staff meetings were now centered around real stories, sharing moments of service, lessons learned, and how to navigate bias when it tries to sneak in quietly. Danielle often sat in on those meetings, not to intimidate, but to listen, to encourage, to make sure no one ever forgot why this turnaround happened in the first place. She didn't stop with that one hotel. Her initiative spread across the entire company. Every single employee, from custodial staff to executive directors, went through a new hospitality training Danielle personally helped design. It wasn't just about how to fold towels or how to greet guests. It was about emotional intelligence, cultural sensitivity, and presence. Danielle introduced a policy called the 4-minute check, which required any employee to spend 4 uninterrupted minutes learning one unique thing about a guest. Not for data, not for upselling, but to connect. The result? Reviews skyrocketed. Guests wrote about feeling seen, respected, and cared for in ways that went beyond traditional luxury. But behind the numbers, something deeper shifted. Employees started taking pride in their work again. They weren't just clocking in, they were contributing to something meaningful. And Danielle, despite running an empire, made time to mentor a small group of new hires each quarter. Leadership, she told them, isn't about being the smartest or the loudest in the room. It's about making sure everyone in that room feels valued enough to speak. Her words didn't just sound good, they stuck. They changed people. They built something bigger than business. They built culture. A year later, the hotel hosted a global hospitality summit, and Danielle was invited to close the event with a keynote. She walked on stage to a standing ovation, but she didn't talk about firing staff or corporate policy. She told a story about a woman who walked into her own hotel and was treated like she didn't belong. A story about silence, bias, and misplaced authority. And then, a story about rebuilding. That moment taught me more than any boardroom ever did, she said. It reminded me that the standards we set mean nothing if we don't have people who believe in them. She paused, letting the room absorb every word. Power isn't in a title. It's in how you treat someone who has none. When she stepped off the stage, dozens of executives approached her, not with handshakes, but with questions. Real ones, about how to reshape teams, retrain minds, and recenter purpose. Danielle didn't give them a manual, she gave them a mirror. Because in the end, her story wasn't just about firing a staff or correcting a mistake. It was about what happens when one woman uses grace, wisdom, and unshakable self-worth to flip a moment of disrespect into a movement of dignity. Quiet power, lasting change. That's how Danielle Thomas redefined what leadership really looks like. Sometimes leadership isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't come with shouting or scenes. Sometimes it walks away, makes one phone call, and changes everything. If you found this story powerful, real, and worth sharing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon for more stories that uncover truth, challenge bias, and celebrate bold leadership. Because respect isn't requested, it's required.